Hi, welcome to Cubs and Culture for January 17th, 2018. I realized last night that I pretty much have only given positive reviews for films for the most part. So today I wanted to give a negative review, and the only film I happen to own that I really hate is Life of Pi. I own it because I used to teach this aesthetics course, and it's actually because it's based off of a book, and there's a pretty critical change between the novel and the film that it's a good film. I hate this fucking film. I hate this. I hate this film. I hate this film. I hate this film. But it is a good sort of film to teach, at least how I taught that class, because I always like comparing a movie to a book. And the movie in Life of Pi and the movie in Life of Pi, the book, they're substantially similar. The author is very pleased with the final product. There is, however, a pretty critical change in the third act about the ordering of a particular scene, which sort of makes the movie version a little bit more ambiguous in my mind, or a little bit different, harder to get out of the quality that make me hate this fucking film. And that I believe ultimately it's just sort of it's a bit like, I'll talk about this film for a little bit in a moment, but it's a bit like God's Not Dead, but not for like fundamentalist Christians, but for people who say things like they're spiritual but not religious. Specifically, I think it ends up basically being unapologetic propaganda around Universalism. Okay, so let me talk about God's Not Dead for a second. God's Not Dead is this absolutely schlocky Christian movie that came out a few years ago, where the central plot, insofar as the plot, is a philosophy professor makes people sign a statement saying God's dead at the beginning of his philosophy class, and then a fundamentalist Christian refused, so he offers him to have 3 different debates with him commenting on it and everything like that. And then there's, of course, their standard, like, there's a preacher character who has to help them, and of course, the hard-boiled atheist philosophy professor, played by Kevin Sorbo, at the end of the movie becomes a Christian on his deathbed. So it's very, very, like, it's basically straight up Christian propaganda. I actually kind of like God's Not Dead because of that quality. Because it's so schlocky and shitty. And like Kevin Sorbo is the worst philosophy professor of all time, in that he doesn't quite understand the first cause argument for God's existence, and he's sort of puzzled by it the first time the introductory student mentions him. Like, that would be like a doctor not knowing what a vein is. It's such bullshit. So because of it, it's like fun schlock to me. Whereas Life of Pi isn't really schlock. It's actually put together really well, but it's sort of serving the same sort of purpose as God's Not Dead, except it's for sort of different theological orientation. Okay, so like God's Not Dead is honest in its intention, and Life of Pi is not. Okay, so let me quickly talk about 2 different things, but give me a moment, cat's being a bit. Okay, so there's this position in theology called Universalism, which in the Christian context initially meant, and for most people it still sort of means this, is that people are universally saved. So because of Christ's atonement and God's grace, everyone is going to go to heaven, either immediately or eventually. So hell doesn't exist. Christ as like you don't have to accept Christ as your savior or anything like that. It's just salvation is just a gift to mankind. Now, connected to this thought, of course, is if Christianity, you don't need to accept Christ as your personal Lord and Savior to have God's grace enter your life. it's pretty natural to then think, well, what does it matter what sort of religious teachings you follow? A lot of them seem to have the same sort of teachings, like all major religions have the golden rule, all of them stress kindness, all of them stress wealth being a source of evil, or the desire for wealth being a source of evil, etc., etc., etc. So Christian universalism, an analog, morphed into a more general philosophical stance of universalism, which is the one I think Life of Pi is sort of its central, making a central argument for, which is all religious traditions, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Mormonism, Quakerism, Buddhism, Jainism, all of them are simply expressions of humans grappling with the divine, and either, if it's a more of a theistic universalism, there's a indeterminate deity or God that's a force, or maybe even a personal God, or a pantheism which we feel or desire, or are drawn to. And Buddhism was the expression of this innate drive or desire in Buddhist context, and Christianity is in the Christian context, and Judaism is for Semitic people, etc. So the actual surface layer of the religions that Muslims' holy day is Friday, Jews is Saturday, and Christians are Sunday, that it doesn't ultimately matter. And it's a surface detail that when you peel that back, it's still the same entity which we call God or gods. So that's sort of the more theological perspective, because there is a claim of all religions being in some sense true and the supernatural does in some sense exist. Then there's sort of a more existentialist or atheistic type of universalism, which is, it doesn't really matter if any of religion's claims are ontological claims, whether or not God actually exists matters. What matters is all religious traditions are able to provide sort of a meaning to people's lives, that it's really meaningful, and so that Christians go to church on Sunday, so it doesn't, or Muslims pray 5 times, whatever the practices are, that by structuring your lives around these narratives or stories provides a way of confronting the harshness of reality. So it doesn't really matter if God actually exists, or if Mormonism is true and Catholicism is false. What matters is that people have traditions or follow any sort of beliefs they want, and that they are all sort of a universal drive grappling with the absurdity of existence. I think ultimately Life of Pi takes the more theological universalism, which is all religious traditions are somehow expressing the same divine truth, just in different ways. But it's just possible to interpret it as a sort of existentialist universalism, where all the religious traditions are a universal human way of grappling with the absurdity of existence. Okay, now, so that's what I mean by universalism. There's also, for traditional arguments for God, there's an ontological argument. There's several versions of it, but basically ontological means the structure of existence or being that improves or implies there's a deity. So there's a very famous argument by C.S. Lewis about, it's not for Christianity, it's for just theism in general, which is, excuse me, we all sort of grapple with, we have these moments in time which strike us, and they, like a thunderstorm, or in his example, going out into a garden the first time when he was a little kid, which fills you with this sort of pure, he used the word joy, but it's not really joy, it's awe, where you feel for a moment that reality is more than reality, but just for a brief second that it's something internal or divine. And so we reason that because we have these moments, this is us feeling the divine because, and this is sort of the ontological argument, every other sort of major drives that people have has the objects exist. So we have a drive for hunger and food exists, or we have drives for thirst, water exists. We have drives for companionship, and so friends and marriage and society exists. And so we have this sort of deep drive because we have moments of joy to connect with the divine. So of course the divine must exist because otherwise we wouldn't have this drive. Now this argument really doesn't work, but it's sort of the idea that we have this deep-seated need for the divine, and that at moments of joy that we feel is us connecting to it because that object must exist because otherwise why would this drive exist? So that's pretty much the setup for talking about Life of Pi. I'll be back with the section about the film.